Chapter 737. When a woman was pregnant, her emotions would inevitably become more sensitive. Li did not feel any obvious difference from Ru Yi, but that did not mean that he could be as carefree as usual. Usually, when it came to dealing with small emotions, he would still take it seriously. The old emperor had tacitly approved of his paternity leave and did not send any more workers over. Even the academy did not urge him. For Li Yi, not being able to see Chang's face was something to be happy about. Mississippi Lu had always been restless, but these days she had a rare moment of peace. Perhaps it was because she was stimulated by Taoist nun. She practiced martial arts every day and would drag him to practice from time to time. She said that she wanted to increase her combat experience. The increase in combat experience was not very obvious, but the pain in his butt became more obvious every time. Li Yi felt that she was taking revenge. Apart from being a human sandbag, Li Yi was not busy these days. Most of the time he cooked, chatted with her, and read some books on prenatal and postnatal care. As for the other things, he left them to Fong to handle. One of them was to buy a house in the city. It was surrounded by beautiful mountains and rivers and was good for the physical and mental health. Although this place was not far from the capital, it was still outside the city. There were no good places to go around. It was inevitable that he would feel depressed if he stayed at home all the time. Li Yi planned to move there as soon as possible. At that time, it would be more convenient for him to do everything. His favorite place should be Hibiscus Garden, Xujiang Garden, and a few other places with good feng shui. The environment was good and most importantly there were no people. However, this was not a good request. A county marquis occupied the royal garden. It would be strange if the civil and military officials did not go crazy. These days he often saw the sloppy old man at home. Previously, he thought that the sloppy old man had been entrusted by his second granduncle to travel thousands of miles to the Qi kingdom. Now it seemed that this was not the case. He saw through it but did not say it. With a grandmaster by his side, the safety factor immediately increased. He originally thought that he could use a pile of white rabbit creamy candies to deal with him. Now he even saved these things. Although there was nothing to do at home, the things that needed to be done were still piling up. For example, the Wang clan's glass business, the eldest princess's ready-made clothing, embroidery, military rations, and even the perfume, soap, and rui nectar that he didn't need to manage. He had too many businesses under his control. Although he didn't have to do everything himself, it was still necessary for him to understand them. Although these things had to be done sooner or later, they weren't that urgent, so Li naturally pushed them off. There were things that needed to be done, and there were naturally people that needed to be seen. As the carriage passed through the capital once again, the sloppy old man finally understood when he saw the complicated expression that flashed across Li Yi's face. However, it was not the road that was blocked. Perhaps it was something else. Zimo, do you still remember when you were a child you loved to eat the Su Jiji's candied plums? At that time, your mother was afraid that you would break your teeth and wouldn't let you eat it, so you secretly saved up money to sneak out. You were almost caught by a trafficker, and the whole family was scared out of their wits. In a small courtyard deep in Willow Lane, a middle-aged man in a blue robe stood there with a smile on his face. He said, "A few days ago I had been looking for that shop. I ran all over the capital but couldn't find it. Only yesterday did I find out that it was the Su Ji, but it later changed its name." He placed a paper bag on the stone table, opened it and said, "It's on Xingping Street. It's now called Fuji. When I came just now I bought some along the way. Try it and see if it tastes the same as before." Zheng Zumo looked at the paper bag on the table and the candied fruits inside. A trace of confusion appeared on her face, mixed with some memories from so long ago that she couldn't remember them at all. How long ago was that? 11 years, 12 years, or 13 years? At that time her mother was very strict with her. Being able to eat Suji's candied plums was probably the happiest thing in her life. However, this small wish was actually not very likely to come true. At that time, although her father's official position was not high, he was very strict. Even though the candied plums from the Suji worldwide commerce were not worth much, if she really wanted to eat them to her heart's content, second uncle would secretly buy them for her, and she would eat them under the blanket at night. At that time, she and her second uncle were not like this. However, things in this world could never return to yesterday, let alone 13 years ago. Seeing that she was unmoved, the middle-aged man's eyes dimmed slightly, but he concealed it well and said, "Tomorrow is the Zheng family's banquet. I have a lot of things to do tomorrow?" Zheng Shichen was taken aback. He shook his head and said, "It doesn't matter. There will be more opportunities in the future." He looked at the sky and said, "Second uncle still has work to do, so I'll leave first. I'll come see you tomorrow." Only when the middle-aged man turned to leave did Zheng Zimo look up. A hint of pain flashed through the depths of her eyes. It's all in the past. Ruoqing walked out of the house and looked at her with some heartache. She placed her hand on her shoulder and said softly. Some long-sealed memories emerged from her mind. Zheng Zimo bit her lip and her face was a little pale. She held Ruoqing's hand tightly and nodded. It's all in the past. Li walked to the door of the small courtyard. He estimated that Ruoqing and Zheng Zimo should not be there at this time. After hesitating for a moment, he still planned to knock on the door. The courtyard door opened from the inside, and a middle-aged man in a blue robe walked out from inside. Li's movement paused slightly. The assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue, Zheng Shichen. Why was he here? When Zheng Shichen walked out of the courtyard, he probably thought that the young man outside the courtyard door was some kind of crazy bees and butterflies. These kinds of people had appeared frequently recently, and he had encountered them countless times. His gaze did not even linger on the man's face, and he simply brushed past him. However, after taking 2 steps, he seemed to think of something and turned back abruptly. At this time, the young man had already walked into the courtyard, and the courtyard door was closed. Zheng Shichen froze in place, and then a trace of surprise appeared on his face. Crazy bees and butterflies? If it was just crazy bees and butterflies, it was impossible to enter this courtyard. That person just now, was it him? Li walked into the courtyard, closed the door and walked inside. When he was still thinking about why he would meet the right assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue here. If he remembered correctly, the other seemed to belong to the Chui family, and was a firm supporter of the King of Shu. Although there was no direct confrontation with him in the court, this person's status in the King of Shu's faction was not low, and he still had this impression. What puzzled him was that without the permission of the two, it was impossible for outsiders to enter this courtyard, and Zheng Shichen was alone. For the time being he could not figure out these things. Thinking that Xiao Chui should know something, Li Yi passed through the moon door and saw a figure sitting at the stone table in front of him. He said, Xiao Zimo? Xiao Chui said these 2 words halfway before realizing that the person sitting there was Miss Zheng. Her brain was a bit short-circuited, and she suddenly changed her words, sounding like, Xiao Zumo. Zheng Zumo and Ruoqing raised their heads at the same time, and the atmosphere in the courtyard began to become a bit awkward. After Li Yi's footsteps stopped, he showed a smile that he thought was brilliant, and waved his hand saying, You are all here, what a coincidence. Chapter 738. When they looked up, the 2 women were startled for a moment. Then joy quickly appeared on their faces. Xiao Chui had said that he had returned to the capital, but they had missed him a few days ago. In fact, they had not gone out these days. The joy on Zheng Zimo's face was quickly concealed. Ruoqing quickly took a few steps forward and then paused. Although she was excited, her voice turned into calmness. Xiao Chui said before that she thought you would come over in a few days. Li nodded. Without any courtesy or awkwardness, he nodded and said, I've been delayed by some matters these few days. Ruoqing looked at him and asked with a smile, How is Madame Li? Neither of them noticed that Zheng Zimo's body trembled slightly when she heard this. She looked at Li Yi and then quickly looked away. She is fine. Li looked back and asked, Was the one who went out just now Assistant Minister Zheng of the Ministry of Revenue? The security around Willow Alley was not low. However, all of this was on the premise that they did not disturb their daily lives. Those ignorant playboys or those with ulterior motives could not even get close to the gate. However, if they had their permission, no one would stop them. Ruoqing nodded and then turned to look at Zheng Zimo. Zheng Zimo had already stood up and walked over. Looking at Li Yi, she said softly, I am sorry. Li Yi was startled, not knowing why she would suddenly say this. I was actually at home that day. Zheng Zimo lowered her head. If it wasn't for me, this would not have happened. This matter had actually been buried in her heart for a long time. The 2 emotions of self-blame and guilt intertwined in her heart every day. It was only at this moment, when she saw that he was safe and sound with her own eyes, that her heart could finally be at ease. Li finally remembered that he had been to Willow Lane that day. At that time, Xiao Cui said that Zheng Zimo was not there. When he went back, he met the Taoist nun. At this moment, he smiled and waved his hand as if he didn't care about this matter at all. He said, This has nothing to do with you. She originally planned it. If it wasn't that day, it could have been the 2nd day or the 3rd day. Instead of asking why Zheng Zimo asked Xiao Chui to lie that day, Li looked at her and asked uncertainly, That Assistant Minister Zheng? Zheng Zimo whispered, It's my 2nd uncle. Suddenly hearing this news, Li Yi was startled. He looked at her and asked, This? What is going on? He could feel Zheng Zimo's emotions at this moment. After saying this, he immediately changed his words. If it's not convenient, it's not inconvenient. Zheng Zimo shook her head. It's all in the past. She walked towards the door. I'm about to go to the shop. Let's talk on the way. Li Yi really didn't expect that she actually had such a story. In terms of clothing, the capital city had undoubtedly set the trend for the Jing kingdom and even the surrounding countries. The dazzling array of clothing had caused the eyes of the women to be dazzled. As for undergarments, most of the women had already accepted them. Although there were still some conservative women who still resisted, they could no longer affect the vigorous reform of undergarments. The brothel had not changed much. In fact, the operating model had matured, and the number of brothels in the capital had long reached saturation. In these months, in addition to expanding to more distant states and counties, they also took root in their respective places, and gradually became a daily thing for the people. Every midnight, Xuanhuan would vaguely remember that more than a year ago, when the brothel was about to close and everyone was worried about their livelihood, he broke into everyone's sight with a disdainful attitude. At first he just wanted to live and survive in such a world. Later he didn't have to worry about living, and he wanted to let the performers of Qin and Mansion live a better life. Later, it became what it was today. The magnificent picture that he had imagined at the beginning would probably be realized in the near future. Li estimated the time and said, "It's getting late. Let's find a place to eat first." "Why don't we go back and cook?" Xuanhuan suggested. Li pointed to the restaurant in front and said, "In a while we'll go to the shops and brothel in front to take a look. Let's make do here first." Xuanhuan nodded, and Zheng Zimo naturally had no objections. Ever since all kinds of new plays began to rise in the capital, whether it was the common people or the powerful officials, many people had developed the habit of listening to plays. Many restaurants in the capital had also undergone some changes. After entering the restaurant, the first thing they faced was a stage that was half the height of a person. On the stage, there were performers specially hired by the restaurant to perform for the guests to enjoy. In the lobby on the first floor, facing the stage, the tables were arranged in the shape of stars. The position on the second floor was better, and one could see the whole scene from a high place. Of course, the corresponding price was more expensive. When Li Yi and the two women walked into the restaurant, it should be mealtime, but there weren't many customers eating. From the outside, this should be a high-end restaurant. Ordinary people probably couldn't afford it, so it was normal for such a situation to occur. Soon a waiter came to greet them. At this time, somewhere on the second floor, wine glasses were clinked, but they were not taken back. Seeing this, someone asked curiously, "Young Master Qin, what's wrong?" Chapter 739. The table of banquets upstairs had always affected the heart of this restaurant's shopkeeper. To be able to open a restaurant here with a high standard meant that there must be some sort of backer behind them. At the very least, that backer could help them avoid most of the troubles they encountered on a daily basis. However, in front of certain people, there would come a time when these people would not be enough. The table upstairs belonged to this category. These rich young masters of the capital might not have much ability themselves, but their family backgrounds were often dukes or third-rank officials of the imperial court. They could not be provoked. Fortunately, although there were a few tables upstairs, they were quite far away from each other, so they were safe. The shopkeeper withdrew his gaze from them and looked at a group of people walking through the door. One of them was a young man who looked very unfamiliar, but he was quite handsome. Beside him were two women who were extremely outstanding in appearance. However, the sloppy-looking old man who was following behind the three of them ruined the atmosphere, causing the four of them to look a little strange. He called for a waiter to go over and wait for him. He no longer paid attention to them and focused on moving the abacus in his hand. Speaking of which, this thing made by the academy was really useful. Using this thing called abacus to calculate accounts was much faster and more convenient than before. Young Master Qin, what's wrong?" At a table on the second floor, the young man carefully asked again. "Nothing." Qin Yu finally withdrew his hand and drank the wine in his cup in one gulp. His expression was calm as if nothing had happened. The young man turned his head and looked down. His gaze swept past a certain place and he was slightly startled. Then, he withdrew his gaze and thought of a certain rumor about this young Duke Qin. His heart immediately understood. He looked down again and his heart suddenly became lively. "Young Master Qin, I'll take my leave for a moment." After another round of toasting, the young man stood up and said apologetically. Then he turned and walked down the stairs. Qin Yu's gaze moved slightly. He glanced down but did not stop him. Wei Liangjun was the son of a newly appointed assistant minister in the Ministry of Rites. Although he was not directly under the Qin family, he had a deep relationship with the Qin family. Assistant Minister Wei had just been appointed, but in a short period of time he had made many achievements. His reputation in the court was quite good, and he was a figure that the Qin family was pushing forward. Across from Qinyu, Zheng Zijian glanced downwards. His face darkened and his facial expression twitched. That man and woman had left an indelible impression in his heart. However, hatred was just hatred. It didn't stop him from thinking that Wei Liangjun, who thought he was smart, was a complete idiot. In the past 5 months, a storm had been brewing in the capital. Some officials had been banished from the capital, but naturally, there were also some officials who had emerged and entered the center of power. The momentary glory made some idiots feel that they could do whatever they wanted in this place. However, he didn't care about how handsome Wei Liang was. Although he didn't want to see that person, he couldn't help but look down. Did that person finally come back? Qin Yu's expression was calm. He pretended to be courteous to the young masters around him who wanted to climb up to the Qin family. As he raised his head to drink, a trace of darkness emerged in the depths of his eyes. Li was ordering dishes. Ordering dishes was actually a science. There were many people ordering how many dishes, how hot or cold, how much soup or dry. All of these were things that had to be paid attention to. In the future there were even special training for this. But today, everyone here was on the same side, so there was no need to worry about this. Xiao Chui was a qualified intelligence agent. She had unintentionally revealed to him what dishes Zheng Zumo and Wan Ruoqing liked to eat. As for the sloppy old man, it was enough for him as long as he had candy to eat. When he ordered the 7th dish, Wan Ruoqing said, "This is enough. There are only a few of us, so we can't eat so much." Li ordered another dish and soup, and then he waved the waiter away. He didn't have to worry about wasting food. Since his martial arts had improved by leaps and bounds, his appetite had increased greatly. A mere 8 dishes and a soup was simply a piece of cake. Across from him, Miss Zheng seemed to have a lot on her mind. She didn't say a word, and occasionally she would be absent-minded. Li guessed that it should have something to do with Assistant Minister Zheng of the Ministry of Revenue. The fall of the Zheng family 10 years ago seemed to be inextricably linked to him, so it was no wonder that Zheng Zumo's mood was affected. He had heard Xiao Chui mention before that she would never come to the capital in this life because of this reason. Li was considering whether to tell those people that if Zheng dared to run around in the future and spoil their mood, he would break his leg so that he could go to court with crutches in the future. Wan Ruoqing didn't speak much of the truth, but as long as it was about the brothel or the shop, she would become talkative. Li was not a qualified boss. These things were actually taken care of by her. To be able to manage such a big business in an orderly manner so that he did not have to worry about the future for a woman, it was really not easy. Such a woman should be very good at running a household. Just when Li Yi's mind was somewhat anchored, he suddenly heard a voice in his ear. "Ladies, are you interested in going up for a drink?" Of course, this sentence was not directed at him. When Li Yi looked over, he saw a strange man coming from behind, holding a wine glass in his hand. At this time he was looking at Wan Ruoqing and speaking. There was always no lack of lascivious men around beautiful women. This kind of situation was very common in this era, not only in this era but also in the future. Wan Ruoqing was originally talking to Li Yi with a smile on her face. She looked back and calmed down. She shook her head and said, "Sorry, we don't know you." "It doesn't matter. Don't you know me now?" The smile on the young man's face was even wider. He said with a smile, "I am Wei Junliang, and my father is the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites." From the moment he walked over to the moment he said these words, he had not looked at Li Yi once. There was no need at all. After all, there were many spoiled brats in the capital, and there were many that he could not afford to offend. But before this he had already done his homework. He was already familiar with those people's identities and appearances, but this young man in front of him was not included. Moreover, if he really was someone of status, how could he not have 2 decent guards by his side? As for the old man who looked like he was about to enter his coffin, he automatically ignored him. Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rites? Li Yi thought about it and asked, "Isn't the Assistant Minister Qin Bo?" Zheng Zumo glanced at him and said in a small voice, "A few months ago the original Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rites was removed from his position and imprisoned. The current Assistant Minister's surname is Wei." Li Yi shook his head and said, "The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rites, a 4th-rank official. How can he be changed so easily? It's really not easy to be an official nowadays." Zheng Zumo looked at him in surprise. The reason the original assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights was investigated was because of the account investigation a few months ago, and that matter. Wan Ruoqing's expression changed slightly when she heard the words assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. She glanced at Li Yi and wondered if this matter would affect him in any way. Then she looked at the young man and said, "Apologies, my friend is here." "Are you talking about this young lady?" The smile on Wei Junliang's face was still there. He said, "No problem, this young lady can come with us." "Apologies?" Wan Ruoqing's tone was calm. Wei Junliang's expression darkened. He said coldly, "This is not giving me face." Chapter 740. For Wei Junliang, what he cared about right now was not his face but the face of the person upstairs. He was full of confidence, but his meaning was already very clear. Just now Duke Qin had glanced down a few times. It was clear that he had thoughts about these two beautiful women. Of course, Wei Junliang himself also had thoughts about them, but in front of Duke Qin he could only give way. Only by satisfying Duke Qin could the Wei family advance further. This was not only his intention, but also the intention of his father, the assistant minister. Although he hadn't been in Jingdo for long, during this time as long as he announced his father's name, any woman would throw themselves at him. Even in Jingdo, an assistant minister was considered a high-ranking official in court. If he went back with his tail between his legs, not only would he lose face, but he would also be laughed at by the people above him. He would probably also leave a bad impression with Duke Qin. Wei Junliang's expression completely darkened. In a cold voice he said, "Miss, you won't give me face like this, will you?" Wan Ruoqing stood up and quietly said, "Sir, please go back. *Tish, you refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit." At this moment, Wei Junliang could no longer suppress the humiliation and anger in his heart. He raised the wine cup in his hand and splashed it toward her face. Wan Ruoqing's expression changed. As she retreated, a white hand appeared in front of her eyes and blocked all the wine. As she retreated, she accidentally bumped into a chair and lost her balance. At this moment, another arm seized the opportunity to wrap around her slender waist. Time seemed to return to 2 years ago. That night in Ningguang Manor, he seemed to have appeared in such a manner. The pain from her calf seemed to disappear into thin air. When Li Yi turned around and asked her, "Are you all right?" she shook her head and a faint blush rose to her face. To the side, Zheng Zumo raised her head and glanced at him. Her gaze quickly moved away. Wei Junliang narrowed his eyes and looked at the young man who had appeared in front of him. He said in a cold tone, "A hero saving the damsel in distress?" Although he had blocked the wine, Li Yi noticed that Wan Ruoqing's clothes were still stained with a few drops of wine. He shook his hand to get rid of some of the wine and walked over. He wiped the back of his hand on the luxurious clothes of the son of the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. He said, "This girl's clothes are dirty. You have to pay for it. I'm honest with you. 10,000 taels of silver. Remember to send it over before tomorrow. You should be able to easily find out where they live. Remember, 10,000 taels, not a penny less." Wei Junliang was stunned by his action. By the time he reacted, there were already a few handprints on his clothes. Although this piece of clothing was expensive, it was not the most important thing at the moment. How dare he talk to me like that? That woman's clothes? Compensation of 10,000 taels? He really dared to say it. The people above should have seen what happened below. At this moment, Wei Junliang had no time to think about why the young man in front of him had the confidence to say these things to him. Instead, he calmed down and said lightly, "I want his hand." The two strong men who had been standing behind him heard this and walked up expressionlessly. "I want his hand." This sentence was somewhat familiar. Li Yi felt like he had heard it somewhere and it shouldn't be too long ago. Then he remembered where he had heard it. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. These young people always wanted someone's hand. Although it was cool to say such things, if they couldn't do it they would be suspected of being too pretentious. Doing things in a low-key manner, being a low-key person, there weren't many young people like him nowadays. In fact, when Wei Junliang came down, the shopkeeper of the restaurant had been watching from the side. He knew that the person in front of him was the son of the new assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. He had just moved to the capital and was in the limelight. Even the people behind him couldn't afford to offend him. This kind of battle was something he really didn't want to participate in, but if there really was a big mess in this restaurant, then this would be the end of his career as a shopkeeper. However, as soon as he stepped forward, before he could even show a flattering smile, he was glared at by Wei Junliang coldly. He shivered and immediately retreated. Seeing the two people walk towards Li Yi, Wan Ruoqing and Zheng Zumo's expressions both changed. Although they knew that he seemed to know some martial arts, the two people in front of them seemed a bit imposing. The sloppy old man sat firmly in his seat. The big white rabbit was gone. He habitually tossed a broad bean into his mouth and said, "Don't panic, don't panic. It doesn't matter how many of these people come. You have to believe in your man." At this moment, he sighed in his heart and even felt a tinge of sourness. No matter where this brat was, there was no lack of beautiful women by his side, whether it was at home or outside or even in the kingdom of Qi. That girl surnamed Lin must have some special feelings for him. To think that when he was young, Su Tian could be considered to be elegant and elegant, attracting the admiration of countless women. How could it be that at that time he was only focused on martial arts? As he thought of this, a look of reminiscence appeared on his face. Being interrupted like this, the two women blushed at the same time. Zheng Zumo turned back to glare at him and secretly spat. But at this moment, the sound of a heavy object falling to the ground could be heard. Looking back at the scene in front of them, both Wan Ruoqing and Zheng Zumo were a bit stunned. The two men fell to the ground, each holding an arm. Bean-sized beads of sweat rolled down their foreheads. Wei Junliang's mouth was wide open and the shopkeeper's face was full of shock. Several of the diners who were paying attention to this table dropped their chopsticks to the ground. No matter how one looked at it, it was hard to tell that the two strong men did not even have the slightest ability to fight back in front of this frail-looking young man. When Li Yi walked over to Wei Junliang, the latter's expression had already changed a bit, but it was not obvious. He only said coldly, "No matter who you are, you can't bear the price for touching me." Li Yi smiled and reached out to tug at the corner of his mouth. He shook his head and said, "Young man, don't keep saying things like face and price all the time. That's not good." The scene before them was really quite dramatic. The two were about the same age. In fact, Wei Junliang looked a bit older. So when the young man put on the appearance of an elder and said those words to Wei Junliang as if he was reprimanding a junior, the scene was a bit out of control. At that moment, someone in the corner laughed. Even though the scene before them was beyond their expectations and they couldn't help but laugh, it also showed that this young man had a lot of scruples about the title of the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights. After all, Wei Junliang was the son of the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights. If he really treated him like how he treated the two guards and crippled one of his arms, things would be irreversible. Wei Junliang was naturally furious that his face was pulled in front of everyone. He wanted to say, "Who the F***ck are you?" but he didn't dare to. If he really angered this madman, it wouldn't be worth it if he got hurt. But after this he had to vent his anger. This madman in front of him and the two women, they could not escape from his hands. This guy called Wei Junliang was very stubborn. When he pulled him, it was far from the feeling of Xuanhuan and Mississippi Lu. Li Yi let go of his hand and patted his shoulder. He said, "Remember to pay for the clothes. Don't forget." Then he said to the shopkeeper, "Please hurry the kitchen, the food is too slow." The shopkeeper was stunned on the spot. How could he still think of eating at a time like this? Did he really think that they could eat this meal in peace? This person doesn't treat the assistant minister as an assistant minister. After saying that, Li Yi raised his head and looked at a certain place upstairs. He sighed softly with a complicated expression on his face. It was really a small world. When he looked away, a sharp glint appeared in his eyes. Some things, if done too much, will become meaningless. Chapter 741. Li Yi had not been idle at home for the past few days after his return. He cared very little about the matters of the court, such as the newly appointed assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights or the changes in other positions in the court. Compared to other matters, they seemed somewhat insignificant. The old emperor's health was deteriorating day by day, and the morning court had been stagnant for a long time. Other than a few major matters, most of the matters in the court were decided by the Minister of State, with the left and right prime ministers as the leaders. This system had been in place since the previous dynasty. The emperor could not personally govern in the short term, so it would not have too much of an impact on the running of the country. The matters of the court were only concerned with the general structure of the situation. Everything else was related to personal matters. Many things had happened in the capital in the past 5 months. Although the information was categorized and organized in an orderly manner, there was still a lot of information, so he only picked out the important ones. It included the two women being ambushed in the middle of the night and narrowly escaping. The death of Li Jianren, the son of the assistant minister of the Ministry of Works, was a major case that shook the entire capital, and there was still no conclusion. He still felt some lingering fear when he thought of this matter. If there was anything, it would be directed at him. He hated these people who schemed in the dark. If the so-called foppish young masters of the capital really lost their heads for a moment, they could mobilize a lot of power in a short period of time. It was fine if it happened once or twice, but not more than 3 times. How many times had this happened? Anyone who was kidnapped thousands of miles away when his wife was pregnant and could only return after a few months would feel a pent-up anger. This aura would not dissipate with time. These few peaceful days did not disperse the anger in his heart. Instead, he could not suppress his impulses. Li raised his head and glanced at the sky, then walked over. Ruoqing pulled his arm and shook her head slightly. She whispered, "Don't be impulsive. I saw an acquaintance, so I went up to catch up. The dishes are here. Eat first, don't wait for me." Li smiled and turned to pat her hand. He said, "I just want to tell them that I'm back." Li looked at the slovenly old man and nodded slightly. He turned and walked up the stairs. I didn't expect that even the Vice Minister Gongzi would be ignored by others. Our young Master Wei is going to lose face this time. There are crouching tigers and hidden dragons in the capital. How long has it been since he arrived? It's good to take him down a peg. Upstairs, even those who were at the same table as Wei Junliang just now were not necessarily of the same mind as him. Although they all needed to curry favor with young Duke Qin, they were also secretly competing with each other. Seeing Wei Junliang's setback, they naturally couldn't help but tease him a little. However, as soon as they finished speaking, they noticed that Zheng Zijian's expression had changed. As for young Duke Qin, his hand that was holding the wine cup stopped in midair, his expression slightly unnatural. The sound of footsteps could be heard as they went up the stairs one after another. The footsteps were short but powerful. In this quiet restaurant they were exceptionally clear. They quickly turned their heads and saw the young man who had been downstairs a moment ago walking up the stairs. What is he doing? The people downstairs who saw this scene all revealed expressions of extreme shock on their faces. The person sitting upstairs was an even more hedonistic hedonist than Wei Junliang. The shopkeeper raised his head to take a look. He seemed to have thought of something and suddenly felt a little dizzy. It can't be. 5 months was not a long time, but it was not a short time either. From when Wei Junliang came downstairs until now, some of the people present seemed to have remembered some people or things that had almost been forgotten. Their faces were stunned and their hearts trembled. It can't be. They muttered to themselves in their hearts. At this moment, Wei Junliang had also come back to his senses. Seeing that the person had already walked up the stairs, he quickly followed and shouted, "What are you doing? Stop." Under the astonished gazes of the restaurant customers, the contemplative gazes of the hedonists at the table, and the sound of Wei Junliang's hurried footsteps upstairs, Li walked to the side of the table and to Qin Yu's side. "Is there a point?" He looked at Qin Yu with a calm expression, like an ancient well without ripples. Hearing this voice again after so many months, Zheng Zijian had to admit that his heart uncontrollably tightened and his palms began to sweat slightly. Those unerasable memories and the continuing pain in a certain part of his body caused him to lower his head, not daring to meet the gaze of the person in front of him. Some of the other young people at the table seemed to have remembered something. Their faces paled and they all lowered their heads. When the others saw that this person actually spoke to young Duke Qin in this manner, they were mostly astonished but even more vigilant. They were not fools and naturally understood that at this time, it was not the time for them to interrupt. "What do you mean?" Qin Yu raised his wine cup, his expression indifferent as he gently took a sip. "I said." Li's voice paused, "Is there a point?" When he said the last sentence, his voice was slightly raised. Slap. The slap was loud and clear, followed by the sound of porcelain breaking. The people at the table saw the young man slap young Duke Qin's face. The wine cup in young Duke Qin's hand flew out of his hand and a swollen handprint quickly appeared on his face. It was hard to describe what they were feeling at this moment. Madman, he really is a madman. Does he even know what he's doing? The moment the slap sounded, Zheng Zijian's body trembled slightly. How many times? How many times? The king of Shu, Royal Prince Duanyang, young Duke Qin. If he was not wrong, this should be the 3rd slap he had given to Qin Yu's face. Wei Junliang had already run up the stairs wanting to go over and stop that madman. Then his footsteps stopped. To be exact, one of his feet had already been raised but he did not know how to take a step forward. He maintained this posture with his mouth wide open and his expression dull. He was not the only one who was stunned. The customers on the 2nd and 1st floor as well as the restaurant manager, were also stunned. Everyone thought that when this young man faced the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, he chose to compromise and did not dare to do anything too extreme to Wei Junliang. However, now that he had slapped young Duke Qin's face, Was he telling them that the son of a mere assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights was not qualified enough? The slovenly elder ate a broad bean and looked up in astonishment. He had to admit that this was the first time he saw this side of this boy. Wan Ruoqing and Zheng Zimo's expressions changed at the same time. They stood up and quickly walked upstairs. One side of Qin Yu's face was already swollen and looked somewhat comical. He stood up and met Li Yi's gaze. His eyes were calm as he said, "This matter has nothing to do with me. The Qin family will not let this go." Young Duke Qin's words, without a doubt, were like throwing another boulder into the already turbulent lake. This time it set off a raging wave. What did he mean by "this matter has nothing to do with me"? Regardless of whether or not it had anything to do with him, with his status, shouldn't he pay back 10 times, 100 times more, and even make the other party beg for death? With a swollen face, what was the meaning of such a serious explanation? Was this still the young Duke Qin who was lawless, robbed women and took liberties with women? He had been slapped in public and still had to give such a serious explanation. This was simply the role model for the capital's playboys. When the top 10 playboys of the capital were selected next year, he would also have a chance to be nominated. On the other hand, wasn't it a bit too much for the young man in front of him to bully an honest playboy? Of course, that was what it looked like on the surface. However, at this moment, everyone knew very well that this unfamiliar young man was someone that even young Duke Qin could not afford to offend. There were also some people who, after carefully rummaging through their memories, finally thought of something. Then they understood that after today the capital would most likely become lively again. "It wasn't you?" Li Yi was startled and then said somewhat apologetically, "Then I'm sorry, I hit the wrong person." Having said that, he turned his head and looked at Wei Junliang. "Then tell me, who was it?" Being stared at by that cold gaze, Wei Junliang suddenly felt his legs go weak and he knelt to the ground with a thud. Chapter 742. Arrogant. He was simply too arrogant. Among the younger generation of the capital, there wasn't a third person who dared to slap Duke Qin in front of everyone. The reason why it was the third was because there was one person who wasn't in the capital. However, there was only one person who could say, "Sorry, I got the wrong number," in such a nonchalant manner after the slap, and let the matter pass so easily. If Wei Junliang still didn't know that this unfamiliar young man in front of him was someone he couldn't afford to offend, including Duke Qin, then he would have lived the first half of his life in vain. However, while he understood, there were others who didn't. Arrogant, too arrogant. A 14 or 15-year-old youth slammed the table and stood up. He ordered the group of guards behind him, "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and bring him to the authorities." Immediately, 2 guards walked over from behind and looked around. When they saw that the guards of the other young masters hadn't made a move, they couldn't help but freeze on the spot and didn't dare to step forward. Wei Junliang's 2 guards were still lying on the floor. They didn't think they were stronger than those 2. If they insisted on putting on a strong front, they might end up like them. "Wang Yu." Someone beside him reminded him in a low voice. Just by looking at Duke Qin's reaction, they knew that today's matter was beyond their control. How could an unrelated person from a branch of the Wang family act like a big shot at this time? "Wang Yu?" Li Yi raised his brows and asked, "Which Wang family?" The youth had a smug look on his face as he said loudly, "Luochuan Wang family. Do you dare to offend the Luochuan Wang family?" The Qin family only relied on Prime Minister Qin. Without Prime Minister Qin, the Luochuan Wang family, which had a deep foundation, would far surpass the Qin family in terms of family wealth and influence. As a super family that could stand up to the Cui family, there weren't many in the entire Jing kingdom. Of course, Wang Yu was only a junior from the branch of the Luochuan Wang family. His status in the Wang family couldn't be compared to the direct descendants like Wang Yong and Wang Dan. However, this didn't stop him from using the Wang family's name to scare outsiders. Even in the capital city where heroes gathered, the words Wang clan of Luochuan could indeed shock a large group of people. "Wang clan?" Li Yi glanced at him and said, "Go ask Wang Yong and see if he dares to speak like this." "You." Wang Yu's face turned red. As a young man, he was unwilling to admit defeat. He pointed at Li Yi and shouted, "You'd better remember what you just said." For the time being, the group of playboys who didn't know the background of the person in front of them were all startled when they heard this. From his words, it seems that he doesn't even care about the Luochuan Wang clan. Qin Yu glanced at him, turned around and walked outside without a word. At this moment, countless people widened their eyes. Leaving just like that? Did the dignified young Duke Qin suffer that slap just now for nothing? Li Yi stretched out a hand and blocked Qin Yu's path. The corner of Qin Yu's mouth twitched. He gritted his teeth and said, "Don't go too far. You think it's not you just because you say it's not you?" Li glanced at him. "If the Qin clan wants an explanation, tell them to come find me in person." Since he couldn't settle down anymore, he might as well tell some people directly that he was back. Although he had left the capital for a long time, he wouldn't be bullied by the son of a mere assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites. Zheng Zumo and Wan Ruoqing came up from downstairs. Zheng Zumo tugged on his sleeve. Li turned around with a smile and said, "It's fine now. Let's go down and eat." Zheng Zijian's expression changed. He finally gritted his teeth and walked out of the crowd. He said in a low voice, "Zumo, slap." Zheng Zijian's eyes widened. He covered one side of his face and looked at Li in disbelief. Li looked at him and said coldly, "You think you can call me Zumo?" Zheng Zumo tugged on his sleeve again and said in a low voice, "He's the son of Assistant Minister Zheng. So what if he was the son of Assistant Minister Zheng? Could the son of Assistant Minister Zheng do whatever he wanted? The son of Assistant Minister Zheng. The son of Assistant Minister Zheng should be Zheng Zumo's cousin. They didn't know each other." Li waved his hand apologetically and said, "Sorry, I hit the wrong person again." Countless people present were petrified upon hearing this. Now, the price for beating up these playboys in the capital was so low. Was that all they needed to say was an apology? A flurry of footsteps came from downstairs. The officials were always one step late. Earlier, when the situation was getting out of control, the owner of the restaurant had already sent a waiter to report to the authorities. He couldn't afford to offend anyone here. Although he couldn't afford to offend the magistrate of the capital, he didn't know the magistrate of the capital, so he'd better leave this headache to him. In fact, when County Magistrate Lu heard the news, he had already cursed all the female relatives of these playboys. Damn it, had it been easy for him these days? He was classified as County Marquis Li's faction and was ostracized by the King of Shu's faction everywhere. Without County Marquis Li, he didn't even have anyone to talk to. He had to deal with chores all day long. These bastards always caused trouble. If he didn't handle it well, he would be caught again. This magistrate of the capital was so useless. He hurried into the restaurant and asked loudly, "Where is the person who beat up people?" "Sir, over there." The owner immediately pointed upstairs. "Who dares?" County Magistrate Lu strode up the stairs. He was about to raise his head and question when he suddenly stopped. His face lit up with joy. He quickly walked over and said in surprise, "Sir Li, when did you come back?" Although it was more appropriate to call Li County Marquis Li, he had gotten used to it when he was in Qingyan Prefecture and had never changed it. "I just came back a few days ago." Li looked at County Magistrate Lu and said with a smile, "I haven't seen you for a long time." "County Magistrate Lu, you're still as elegant as ever." Seeing that the capital official who had hurried over was actually talking about the old days with that young man, countless people at the scene were immediately dumbfounded. Zheng Zijian was slapped, but at this moment, there was no hatred in his heart, only fear. He knew why young Duke Qin didn't dare to return the slap after being slapped. He also knew why that person could even ignore the Wang family of Luochuan. It was because he and these people were no longer on the same level. He was the youngest marquis in the Jing kingdom, the dean of the academy, the teacher of the princes and princesses, the favorite of the emperor, and even had the power to mobilize the secret intelligence bureau. He was not a playboy, because the biggest playboy in the capital only relied on the blessings of his father's generation. When their father's generation saw him, they also had to give way to him. County Magistrate Lu suppressed the joy in his heart and looked behind him. He asked, "Sir Li, the matter here, the younger generation is insensible and needs the elders to teach and advise them. Otherwise, I'm afraid they will go astray in the future." Li waved his hand and said, "It's just a small matter. There's no need to trouble Sir Lu. Let their elders take them back and discipline them well." As soon as these words came out, everyone at the table, including Zheng Zijian, changed their expressions. He meant that all the people present today, none of them could leave. If their elders came here to take them back, they would probably be turned upside down after they went back. At this moment, County Magistrate Lu had already understood some meaning from Li Yi's words. He was secretly delighted. This time, County Marquis Li was really angry. It was a good opportunity for him to frighten those who secretly played tricks. County Magistrate Lu waved his hand, and the yamen runners and constables behind him had surrounded the stairs. He smiled and stretched out his hand saying, "Sir Li, please." Li looked back at the two women and said, "Don't stand here. Let's go down and eat." Under the gaze of all the people in the building, they went down the stairs. When passing by the shopkeeper, Li looked at him discontentedly and asked with a frown, What's the matter? It's been so long but not a single dish has been served. The shopkeeper shuddered all over and immediately said, I'll go and urge them right away. Right away. After saying that, he ran to the kitchen. He had already made up his mind that if the chef couldn't cook those dishes in 15 minutes, in 15 minutes, he didn't need to come here tomorrow. Chapter 743. It turned out that it was necessary to urge the waiter when eating out. Soon after he urged the waiter began to serve the dishes one after another. Come on, eat more fish to nourish your body. Eat more vegetables too so that the nutrition will be balanced. This dish tastes good. Try it. County Magistrate Liu, have you eaten? Do you want to sit down and have some? As a result, such a strange scene appeared in the restaurant. It was very quiet in the restaurant. The playboys were blocked upstairs, feeling nervous and panicked. The young man downstairs had already started to pick up food for the two girls from time to time, and did not forget to comment on them. This kind of strong contrast gave everyone quite a shock. Was he really so fearless? Although those playboys couldn't leave for the time being, their guards had been released, and they might have rushed back home to report this matter. Was that young man going to face the Qin family, the Wang family, the Zheng family, and the Wei family alone, which was powerful enough to shake the capital? After such a thing happened, the diners on the first floor and the second floor were naturally not in the mood to eat anymore. Some people were worried that they would be affected by the matter, so they left in a hurry. Some people thought that the following scene might be even more exciting and they wanted to stay and watch. Of course, from County Magistrate Liu's attitude and the young man's fearlessness in the face of such powerful people, many people had already guessed his identity. Yes, in the whole capital, who dared to disrespect Prime Minister Qin and the officials of King of Shu except County Marquis Li, who had been silent for a long time. After a long silence, when he reappeared in people's sight, it set off a monstrous wave again. In any case, there would be a big show today. Upstairs. Although one side of Qin Yu's face was swollen, he was quite calm, and he even sat down again, drinking and eating as if nothing had happened. However, his other hand, which was hidden in his sleeve, was clenched into a fist, with blue veins popping out, indicating that he was not as calm as he appeared to be. Zheng Zijin covered one side of his face, and the fear in his heart was greater than anger. He finally came back. Li Jinren was dead, and after Chen Lisan was saved by the dung, he shut himself in his room and refused to see any guests. When Cui Shixin went out, he would always be accompanied by more than 10 guards. Obviously he was scared out of his wits. All this had nothing to do with that person because what he was best at was to kill others with a borrowed knife. Whenever he thought of being targeted by such a person, he would feel a chill in his heart. Thinking of this, he immediately looked at Wei Junliang with deep disgust. Wei Junliang walked over in a daze. He didn't dare to look at Qin Yu. He looked at the others and murmured, Who is he? Zheng Zijin didn't answer, but the young man who spoke just now raised his eyebrows and said, No matter who he is, he's dead for sure this time. The Wang family will send someone over soon. I want to see how he'll explain to the Wang family then. Among the people present, many were descendants of rising officials, so they could not wait to get involved with the Qin family and the King of Shu. However, they did not expect that such a thing would happen with young Duke Qin around. Among the people present, many of them were descendants of new officials. Therefore, they couldn't wait to get involved with the Qin family and the King of Shu. However, they didn't expect that such a thing would happen with little Duke Qin around. Wei Junliang looked at the crowd and felt a little relieved. There were so many people and there were so many families behind them. Who did he think he was? Even the Qin family would have to think twice before going against so many people at the same time. What's wrong? The food is not to your taste? Li Yi asked in surprise, looking at the two women who did not seem to be in high spirits. Zheng Zumo glanced at him. She really could not find a second person who could still be in the mood to eat under such circumstances. She pointed upwards and asked, Is there really no problem over there? Li looked up and waved his hand saying, Don't worry, it's fine. He picked up another piece of tender fish and put it in her bowl saying, Eat it quickly. It will get cold soon. Looking at the pile of fish in the bowl, and even the fish bones were picked out and put aside, Zheng Zumo shook her head, but she was still worried. Wan Ruoqing did not speak again. Seeing that Li Yi did not care at all, she had already understood that he was not impulsive in this matter. As for the deeper reason, she did not care much. She only needed to know that as long as he was there, all the difficulties were not difficult. The sound of hurried footsteps coming from outside the door immediately affected the hearts of the people in the restaurant. A young man with a calm temperament walked in quickly. The first thing he saw was County Magistrate Liu sitting on the side. He frowned and asked, "Lord Lu, what's going on?" Before County Magistrate Lu could speak, someone had already shouted upstairs. The young man named Wang Yu leaned on the railing, waved his arms and shouted, Big brother, I'm here." Wang Yong looked up and saw that the stairs had been surrounded by officials. He frowned again. County Magistrate Lu was worried about how to explain to the eldest son of the Wang family. On the other side, a faint voice came over. "Brother Wang, long time no see." Hearing that, Wang Yong was stunned at first and then overjoyed. He turned his head and walked over quickly, asking, "Brother Li, you're back." Not to mention that the cooperation between the two families had brought great profits to the Wang family, the two families had advanced and retreated together. Even what his father said made him have to treat Li Yi specially. Originally, he heard that Wang Yu had caused trouble outside and was detained. For the sake of the Wang family's reputation, he came in person. He did not expect to meet Li Yi here, which was a pleasant surprise. Just by looking at Wang Yong's attitude, Li Yi knew that his family must have made a lot of money recently. Wang Yong simply moved a chair over and sat down next to Li Yi. He asked with a smile, "When did you come back?" Li Yi smiled and said, "Just a few days." From the moment Wang Yong stepped into the restaurant, he naturally became the focus of everyone's attention. The eldest son of the Wang family, the future head of the family, would eventually have to control that huge organization. His every move would be of great importance and would be watched by countless people. Originally, they thought that Wang Yong would definitely get back at the Wang family for being humiliated. In the capital or even the Jing kingdom, not to mention the royal family, there were only a handful of people of the same age who could be compared to him. However, his expression made everyone disappointed. Of course, there were more surprises. From the situation before them, it was obvious that the two of them knew each other. Furthermore, judging from Wang Yong's attitude, it could be said that he was extremely friendly. Even the fathers of those rich kids upstairs would not be able to make the future head of the Wang family humble himself like this. In an instant, the status of the young man in their hearts rose to another level. Wang Yu leaned on the railing and looked at the scene below with his mouth wide open. The strong contrast between his expectations and reality made it difficult for him to adapt. That was his eldest brother, his savior. How could he start a conversation with that guy? His eldest brother, Wang Yong, was different from him. He was the eldest brother of the younger generation of the Wang family and was also someone whom the family had high hopes for. From a young age, he had been groomed to be the next head of the family and had a lot of prestige among the younger generation. Now that the Wang family had been humiliated, shouldn't he be angrily getting back at them? Why did the scene before him happen? Wang Yu did not have too much time to be surprised. Downstairs, after clarifying the cause of the matter, Wang Yong's originally smiling face had already darkened. He stood up, looked up and said coldly, "Get down here." Wang Yu's face revealed a look of horror. He grabbed the railing tightly because if he let go, he would directly collapse to the ground. Chapter 744. In the end, Wang Yu still came down. The branch he belonged to was only one of the branches of the Wang family and was not valued by the Wang family. Even his father did not dare to put on airs in front of the eldest young master of the Wang family. "I'm really sorry, Brother Li. The Wang family did not teach you well and caused you trouble." Wang Yong looked at Li Yi apologetically. When he turned around, his face instantly darkened and he said coldly, "Quickly apologize to County Marquis Li." He was angry not only because Wang Yu had offended someone he shouldn't have, but also because Wang Yu had made friends with someone he shouldn't have. This was something the Wang family could not allow. The young man named Wang Yu no longer looked arrogant. He lowered his head and said in a low voice, "County Marquis Li, I'm sorry. I was wrong." Hearing his soft voice, Wang Yong's face darkened and he said, louder, "Didn't you eat?" Wang Yu raised his head and looked at Li Yi. He said loudly, "I'm sorry, I was wrong." Li Yi looked at him with a faint smile and asked, "Why don't you tell me where you were wrong?" Wang Yu was stunned and then he had an urge to cry. Yes, where did he go wrong? He just came to have a meal with his friend and did not offend anyone. Why was he blocked here? What did he do wrong? The young man still could not stand the grievance. As he thought about it, his eyes became a little moist. Wang Yong said apologetically, "I'm really sorry about what happened today. Brother Li, I will pay you a visit and apologize in 2 days." Wang Yong left with Wang Yu. Paying a visit and apologizing was only one reason. The cooperation between the Wang family and the Li family was more important. After not seeing each other for 5 months, he still had a lot of things to discuss with Li Yi. The people who stayed in the restaurant were a little disappointed. The future head of the Wang family had come personally, but nothing exciting had happened. It was really boring. However, Wang Yong's attitude towards that person had truly shocked them. The situation in the capital was very complicated. If the future head of the Wang family treated him so cautiously, they didn't know if he could still control the big shots that came one after another. Eat more vegetables. You should eat more too. Maybe because the atmosphere was ruined, Ruoqing and Zheng Zimo were very polite today. Li Yi had to keep putting food on their plates to ease the atmosphere. It was unlikely that Miss Zheng would pick up food for him. Wan Ruoqing smiled as she picked up the food from a distance and placed it on his plate. After scanning the three for a long time, the sloppy old man took a big bite out of his drumstick and looked away, unable to bear to look at them any longer. In a carriage on the street, of Yu and Zheng Zimo, he couldn't bear. In the end, he could not help but raise his head and ask in a low voice, "Big brother, who is that person?" Wang Yong glanced at him and said, "I won't tell your father about what happened today, but if you still interact with those people in the future, don't blame the Wang family for being heartless." Yong to Wang's words. What happened today left a deep impression on him. He had never seen his usually gentle brother show such an expression. How could he not take his brother's words to heart? At the same time, that smiling face left an indelible impression in his heart. Outside the carriage, a sedan chair hurriedly passed by, heading for a restaurant. Assistant Minister Wei of the Ministry of Rites rushed into the restaurant and immediately saw the two guards of the Wei family holding their arms. His eyelids twitching, he walked over and asked, "Where's the young master?" Wei Junliang waved from above. Father, I'm here." When Wei Junliang ran down, the officials didn't stop him. Assistant Minister Wei looked at him and asked with a frown, "What's going on?" Wei Junliang stammered and didn't say a word. Even young Duke Qin didn't dare to resist when he was slapped. Even Wang Yong had to treat him with respect. As his father, no matter how he thought about it, he wasn't good enough. Assistant Minister Wei. County Magistrate Liu walked up and cupped his hands at the man. "Lord Liu." Assistant Minister Wei recognized him. He looked at him and asked, "What exactly is going on?" Li Yi tilted his head and glanced at him, saying, "You'll have to ask Assistant Minister Wei's son." "Who are you?" Assistant Minister Wei only heard that his son was detained by the officials and hurried over. He didn't know the specifics, so he looked at the young man who interrupted and asked with a frown. County Magistrate Liu stepped forward and said, "This is Marquis Li." "Marquis Li?" Hearing this title, Assistant Minister Wei's heart skipped a beat, but he still asked, "Which Marquis Li?" "Marquis Chang'an," County Magistrate Liu answered. This time, Assistant Minister Wei's heart completely sank. Marquis Chang and Li Yi. This name was really well known. The King of Shu and even Prime Minister Qin's faction had suffered great losses at his hands. It was impossible to estimate how much damage they had suffered. In the current imperial court, the two factions were opposing each other, and this Marquis Li was a key figure in the opposing faction. Even the Chen family behind him had to avoid him, let alone a mere assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites. Moreover, as the new assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites, he knew better than anyone how he got his position. Especially after listening to County Magistrate Liu's story, cold sweat began to drip uncontrollably from Assistant Minister Wei's forehead. It was already hard enough for him to have a conflict with this person, but what was even more frightening was that his side wasn't in the right. Assistant Minister Wei lowered his head and said solemnly, "It's all my fault for not teaching properly and offending Marquis Li. This official will take him back and discipline him properly." Li Yi waved his hand and said nonchalantly, "It's fine. It's normal for young people to be impulsive. Assistant Minister Wei, there's no need to punish your son too much. It's better to guide him." Assistant Minister Wei froze for a moment and immediately nodded. Yes, I understand. Many thanks, Marquis Li." At this moment he was extremely astonished. This Marquis Li was so reasonable and didn't seem as difficult to deal with as the rumors said. It seemed like he was very easy to talk to. "Let's not talk about the conflict for now." Li looked at him and said, "However, your son dirted my friend's clothes just now. I don't know. He should compensate." Assistant Minister Wei fiercely nodded and said, "This is how it should be. I will make him compensate for this young lady's clothes." If everyone was as reasonable as Assistant Minister Wei, it would save a lot of trouble. Li smiled and said, "Since it's like this, I won't say anything else. Assistant Minister Wei, don't forget to deliver 10,000 taels of silver to Willow Alley before tomorrow." "Of course, one." Assistant Minister Wei nodded and then froze for a moment. He asked with some uncertainty, "How much?" Even if the clothes were completely made of gold thread, they wouldn't be worth 10,000 taels of silver, right? I must have misheard. A trifling 10,000 taels, Sir Wei definitely won't take it to heart. Li waved his hand and said, then it's settled. Sir Wei can take your son away. He naturally wouldn't take 10,000 taels of silver to heart. It wasn't that the Wei clan couldn't take it out, but if he really did, he would probably have to pay for his coffin. At this moment, Assistant Minister Wei finally understood that this wasn't a matter of compensation. This was a warning and also a deterrent. If the Wei clan paid 10,000 taels of silver, then this matter would be settled. Otherwise, his position as the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights would probably have to change. Assistant Minister Wei didn't doubt that the seemingly harmless young man just now had this kind of ability. He didn't know how he left the restaurant and walked on the street in a daze. At a certain moment, he was startled awake and hurriedly said, quick, to the Qin estate. Father? Wei Junliang had just said one word when he was slapped across the face by Assistant Minister Wei, attracting the attention of all the pedestrians on the street. Father, you hit me? Young Master Wei, who had never been treated like this before, covered his face and said in disbelief, isn't it just a county marquis? You are the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights and have Uncle Qin behind you, why are you afraid of him? How did I give birth to such an idiot like you? Assistant Minister Wei fiercely glared at him and said through gritted teeth, do you know why the previous Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights was imprisoned? Chapter 745. After Wang Yong, Assistant Minister Wei of the Ministry of Rights also left with his son. They didn't lower their voices on purpose so the people in the restaurant could hear them clearly. 10,000 taels of silver. Just because the girl's clothes were stained with a few drops of wine, the Wei family had to pay 10,000 taels of silver as compensation. This price was unimaginably high. Of course, those who could sit here and eat were not ordinary people at the bottom of society. Compared with ordinary people, they naturally had a better sense of politics. The officialdom had always been like a battlefield. The situation in the court changed every day, not to mention in 5 months. Everyone knew that County Marquis Li and the Qin family had never been on good terms with King of Shu's faction. In fact, before he left the capital, King of Shu's faction had secretly made a lot of moves. Many people with a keen sense of smell had sensed it. However, County Marquis Li left the capital at that time. Coincidentally, the son of the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works besieged and killed 2 girls on the street. Then, the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works was investigated. Overnight, he turned from a high-ranking official to a prisoner. His Majesty was furious about this. During that time, King of Shu's faction didn't dare to do anything out of line for fear of provoking the emperor again. However, as time went by, they began to move again. His Majesty happened to be ill, so the morning court session was not held. Except for important matters, everything else was handed over to the Minister of Rights to make decisions. As a result, they became more and more unscrupulous. However, County Marquis Li came back. Today's matter naturally couldn't be easily understood. This was a response and a demonstration. It could also be said that it was a declaration to those who were hiding behind the scenes. Thinking of all the things that happened 5 months ago, some people were secretly shocked. It seemed that there would be a big storm in the capital again. After the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights, several powerful officials came one after another. Of course, they were the parents of the playboys upstairs. This meal wasn't peaceful at all. Li was a little regretful. The good atmosphere had been ruined by these ignorant fellows. He knew some of these people, but he had never heard of some of their names. It seemed that a lot of things had happened in the capital in the past few months. He didn't have the mood to greet the others. After all, except for Wei Junliang, most of them were sitting quietly. He didn't want to extort them again. Without a good reason, he couldn't ask them for compensation. He couldn't just say that he didn't like them, right? This was too much. After warming up a little, he felt much better. He didn't want to deal with those people anymore. Therefore, he left those nobles and officials to County Magistrate Lu. Seeing that the 2 women stopped moving their chopsticks, Li also put down his chopsticks and asked, "Are you full? If you are, let's go." Wan Ruoqing and Zheng Zumo looked at each other and nodded. Li looked back at County Magistrate Lu. "Mr. Lu, please take care of this. It's no trouble at all." County Magistrate Lu waved his hand again and again. If he was alone today, he naturally couldn't control such a situation. However, with County Marquis Li standing behind him, he didn't need to worry too much about the families of those people. As the 2 of them spoke, a few more people walked in from outside. Every time someone came in, a small commotion would erupt. "Who is this? I don't know him." Is there such a person in the circle of officials and nobles in the capital? You don't even recognize him? Isn't he the fifth master of the Qin clan? After being enlightened by one person, everyone suddenly understood. The Qin manor was prosperous. Prime Minister Qin had 5 sons, and 3 of them were officials in the court. When the Qin clan was at its peak, the 2 of them held important positions in the Xianxia province and directly participated in the affairs of the court. Although the Qin clan's current power couldn't be compared to that time, it still couldn't be underestimated. The 4th master of the Qin clan was low-key. Although he didn't participate in court politics, he had a lot of influence in the business world. Only the 5th master of the Qin clan didn't have any talent, but in terms of fame in the Qin clan, he was probably second only to the biggest playboy in the capital, young Duke Qin. There was no other reason. 2 years ago, a scandal broke out in the Qin clan that shook the entire capital, and it happened to 5th Master Qin. Young Duke Qin, who had always had a special fetish for married women, had unexpectedly set his sights on his own uncle one day. Taking advantage of his drunkenness, he forced himself on the concubine that 5th Master Qin had taken in. After 5th Master Qin bumped into him, he kicked him out of the room. The concubine couldn't bear the humiliation and committed suicide on the spot. At the time, this matter was very big and caused a huge uproar in the entire capital. Later, for some reason, it was left unsettled. After that, young Duke Qin was still young Duke Qin, but 5th Master Qin was no longer that 5th Master Qin. His identity had become his humiliation. Because of his identity as 5th Master Qin, everyone fawned over him on the surface but secretly mocked and disdained him. In the future, no matter how quickly the Qin clan soared, 5th Master Qin would never be able to raise his head again. County Magistrate Liu went over to greet him. Li Yi's gaze briefly met with a brawny man behind the middle-aged man before quickly moving away. Zheng Zumo and Wan Ruoqing stood up, but the latter's body swayed. If it weren't for Li Yi's timely support, she probably would have fallen to the ground. "What's wrong?" Li Yi asked with concern. Wan Ruoqing frowned slightly and said, "I think I bumped into something just now." When she was avoiding that man just now, her calf bumped into a table and chair. At that time she was nervous and didn't feel anything. Now that she was completely relaxed, there was a burst of pain. Zheng Zumo walked over to help Li Yi support her. Li Yi looked at her and asked, "Can you still walk?" "It's fine." Wan Ruoqing shook her head. With Zheng Zumo's support, although it was a bit difficult to walk, she could still move slowly. Qin Yu and 5th Master Qin didn't have much communication. When they walked down the stairs, they didn't look at Li Yi and walked straight out of the restaurant. When Li Yi and the 2 women walked out, they just happened to see Assistant Minister of Revenue Zheng Shichen rushing over. He looked at Zheng Zumo with an extremely surprised expression. Zheng Zumo lowered her head and didn't say anything. On the street, seeing Wan Ruoqing frown with every step, Li Yi felt that the asking price for the clothes just now was still a bit too low. That Wei guy had gotten it too easy. However, after all, he was a man of his word. It was hard to take back what he had said. It was not appropriate to raise the price now. If he could not deliver the money by tomorrow, it would be reasonable for him to double the compensation. Presumably, the other party would have nothing to say about it. "Does it hurt a lot?" The street was bustling with people and carriages couldn't go through. Seeing Wan Ruoqing's tightly furrowed brows, Li Yi finally stopped and asked. Wan Ruoqing shook her head and said with a smile, "It's fine." Her brows didn't even relax, so this smile looked a bit forced. Li Yi walked in front of her and squatted down. "Come on up." "Ah." Wan Ruoqing stilled slightly. When she understood what he meant, her pretty face blushed. He was different from all the men she knew. Although she had tried her best to get used to the way the 2 of them interacted, she still felt that putting food on each other's plates was the limit of what she could do. This was something she had only gotten used to after a long time, because when he said these things, his eyes were always as clear as water, without a trace of lust. Other than him, if it was anyone else, she would most likely think of them as a lecher and wouldn't give them any good looks. But habit was habit. If she was carried by him through the crowded streets and watched by so many people, just thinking about it made her face a little hot. Zheng Zumo also looked at this scene in a daze. At this time, Li Yi had already begun to urge. "It will be dark by the time we walk back like this." Li Yi looked back and said, "Let's hurry, it's not the first time anyway." The first time he was talking about was naturally when she had fainted from a high fever when she came out of Ningguangfu and Qing'anfu. Zheng Zumo turned her head with some difficulty. "Not first time?" Chapter 746. Wei Junliang's mind was still muddled as he stepped through the gates of Duke Chen's estate. Just now, while they were walking, He had already heard his father describe the past of that Marquis Li. He had beaten Duke Qin, Royal Prince Duanyang, and the King of Shu in front of all the civil and military officials. Who knew how many playboys in the capital had suffered at his hands? Qin Lisan had locked himself in his home and refused to see anyone. Shui Shixin had become a frightened bird. Duke Qin had just been slapped. The King of Shu had been banished, and Royal Prince Duanyang had become a eunuch, and that Marquis Li was still safely staying in the capital. These were his past achievements. However, this was not all. His reputation was not built from fighting. He was also the head of the Mathematics Academy and the teacher of many princes and princesses. A few months ago, the vigorous investigation in the capital had been carried out by a student of the Mathematics Academy. The fall of the previous assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, Qin Bo, was also during that investigation. It was because Qin Bo was imprisoned that his father had the opportunity to be pushed out of the spotlight by the Qin family. After some maneuvering in court, he was transferred from a place far away from the capital to here. From a certain perspective, he had gone from a playboy in a remote place to a playboy in the capital. Should he thank that person? But why did he still feel a little guilty? Wei Ji was the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. With the powerful support of the Qin family with his current age, it was not impossible to take a small step forward before he retired. However, at this moment he no longer dared to think about these things. The most important thing now was to solve the problem in front of him. Just as he stepped through the gates of the Qin family, Wei Ji looked at the gatekeeper and said somewhat impatiently, "Is the manager here? I have an urgent matter." The current manager of the Qin family was Qin Qin, but the manager that Wei Ji spoke of was the second master of the Qin family, Qin Chong. He naturally had his reasons. Qin Chong was his brother-in-law, so it would be more suitable for the two of them to communicate. "Miaoyu, I heard that the brothel has a new show these days. I heard that it is not bad. Do you want me to go with you some other day?" In a small garden behind the Qin residence, there were many artificial mountains and flowing water. Qin Chong walked to the pavilion and smiled at a white-haired lady. The white-haired woman looked at the water with a hint of worry hidden between her brows. When she turned her head, her brows relaxed. She shook her head and said, "Second brother is busy with work. I'll let Xiu accompany me for these things." Qin Chong shook his head and smiled. "I don't have much to do recently. Whenever you want to go, second brother will take a leave to accompany you." The white-haired woman didn't say anything else. As a dignified official, she stood outside the courtyard and looked at him with a smile on her face. A servant of the Qin manor walked over and pointed at a place not far away. He said respectfully, "Second master, Lord Wei of the Board of Rights is here." He knew about the relationship between Sir Wei and the second master, so he didn't stop him and brought him here. A hint of confusion appeared on Qin Chang's face as he asked, "The Bureau of Rights has been rather busy these past few days. How did you find the time to come here today?" Wei Ji revealed a dejected expression and said, "It's all because of this brat." When Wei Junliang saw Qin Chong, he only called him uncle, in a low voice before lowering his head and remaining silent. Qin Chong glanced back at the pavilion and pointed ahead. "Let's talk over there." "Second brother, there's no need." A gentle voice came from behind him. The white-haired woman had already walked out. After nodding slightly at Wei Ji, she looked at Qin Chong and said, "You can talk here. I'll go take a walk in the back." Saying this, she walked deeper into the garden with the two servant girls. Qin Chong nodded and then walked into the pavilion. "Speak. What exactly is the matter?" The Wei family could be considered to have some power in the capital. They wouldn't go so far as to seek out the Qin family just because a junior had caused trouble. Wei Ji sighed and said, "Today Liang was eating in a restaurant. Because of a woman, he got into a conflict with someone. You want the Wei family to pay 10,000 taels of silver for a mere piece of clothing?" After hearing this, Qin Chong didn't get angry. Instead, he smiled and asked, "I'd like to know in the capital who would be so bold?" "The Marquis of Chang'an County, Li Yi," Wei Ji said gravely as he looked at him. The smile on Qin Chong's face froze. His gaze was like lightning as he looked at Wei Ji and asked word by word, "Who, did you say?" "The Marquis of Chang'an County, Li Yi," Wei Ji repeated. Qin Chong's face darkened. He looked at Wei Junliang and asked, "Speak. What exactly happened? Don't leave out a single word." Hearing this icy voice, Wei Junliang shivered. When he spoke again, his voice was trembling and tears were about to fall. I and young Duke Qin." After hearing Wei Junliang's words, Wei Ji saw that Qin Chong's face was dark and that he hadn't said anything. He couldn't help but feel uneasy and asked, "That 10,000 taels of silver?" he actually came back. Qin Chong clenched his fists and muttered, "What does this mean? A warning?" Qin Chong's expression became calm again. At a certain moment, he turned his head to look at Wei Ji and said, "That 10,000 taels of silver, just think of it as buying a lesson." Hearing this, Wei Juanliang's expression immediately changed. Because Wei Ji was already mentally prepared, he only revealed a bitter expression and didn't speak. "When did he say?" "Before tomorrow." Qin Chong waved his hand and said, "Go back and prepare before the sky darkens." Behind the fake mountain, a delicate figure leaned against it, a hint of a smile on her lips. She closed her eyes, put her palms together and sincerely said, "Thank the gods and Buddhas, it's good that you're back, it's good that you're back." When Wei Junliang walked out of the Qin estate, both sides of his face were swollen. In the end, he still ended up in the same state as Duke Qin, except that the former had been beaten by the Marquis of Li Yi, while he had been beaten by his own father. There were many wastrels with swollen faces like him in the capital today. The people of the capital were shocked to see a few important figures walk out of a restaurant with gloomy expressions. The young people following behind them were crestfallen, as if they had been hit by frost. After teaching their own juniors a lesson, the officials and nobles of the capital all had extremely complicated expressions on their faces. That person was using this method to tell them that he had returned. Although the atmosphere between men and women in the Jing kingdom was still somewhat traditional, there were many reasons for a man to carry a woman on his back and walk on the street. At most, people would look at him a few times, but it might not necessarily be considered indecent. However, when they returned to Willow Lane and put Ruoqing down, her face was still red to the ears. Li didn't have anything to be shy about. After all, it wasn't the first time he had carried her on his back. Besides, she had carried Xuanhuan, Mississippi Lu Yongning, and the Tsundra Lolita. In comparison, although Mississippi Lu usually didn't show off, she actually had the best figure. Li Yi discovered this when she taught him how to ride a horse last time. Next it should be Wan Ruoqing. Xuanhuan was still young, so there was still room for development in the future. Li Yi stopped some thoughts in time, looked at Wan Ruoqing and said, "See how your injuries are. Do you need to call the doctor over?" The blush on Wan Ruoqing's pretty face hadn't faded yet. She shook her head and said, "No need. After a while, you should be fine after applying some medicinal wine." "Let's see." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Let's see how serious the injuries are first." Wan Ruoqing's face became even redder. Her injuries were on her calf. If he wanted to see, wouldn't he have to take off her shoes and socks and roll up her pants? But how could a woman's private area be so easily seen by others? Zheng Zumo glanced at Li Yi and said, "You go out first." Li Yi looked at her and asked in confusion, "Why? A woman's private area? Is that somewhere you can look?" Zheng Zumo glared at him again and said, "I'll just watch from here." Li Yi then realized that this wasn't the future, where the streets were full of white legs and some girls' pants couldn't even cover their buttocks. This was still an era where one had to be responsible for looking at a girl's feet. However, what Miss Zheng said wasn't quite right. If she couldn't look at her feet, then other places. Some images emerged in Li Yi's mind, and he couldn't help but look at her a few more times. Seeing that he was looking at her strangely, Zheng Zumo seemed to have thought of something. Her face turned redder than Ruoqing's, and there was a hint of annoyance in her voice. "Get out now." After waiting outside for a while, Zheng Zumo came out, her cheeks still red. She glanced at him and said, "I looked. It's just some bruises. It shouldn't be a big deal." Li Yi nodded and said, "I'll have someone bring some medicine for bruises later." There were many good things from the palace at home, which should be better than those sold in the medicine shop. Zheng Zumo didn't speak and didn't look at him. The atmosphere began to become a bit awkward. Li Yi looked at the sky. It was time to go back to cook. He looked back at her and said, "If there's nothing else, I'll go back first." Zheng Zumo waved her hand. "Go." Li Yi thought about it, turned around, opened his arms and said with a smile, "We haven't seen each other for a long time. Won't you give me a warm hug?" "Ba lecture." Zheng Zumo looked at the faint smile on his face and glanced at him. She snorted and turned to walk into the room. Li Yi smiled and shook his head. However, when he turned his head, an imperceptible disappointment appeared in his eyes. "Hey, stop." He heard the voice behind him and turned around. A warm and fragrant body pressed against him. Zheng Zumo's body left immediately, leaving behind a fragrance that didn't belong to any of the perfume from Rui workshop lingering in his nose. Li looked at her and murmured, "I did hug, but it wasn't warm enough. Ba lecture shameless." Zheng Zumo took a few steps back, her face even redder than before. Li smiled, turned around and walked out the door, waving his hand casually behind him. See you tomorrow. Zheng Zumo watched his figure go away before withdrawing her gaze. She said in a daze, see you tomorrow? I'll ask again tomorrow. You guys continue. Li turned around and strode out the door. He grabbed a pillow that flew out from inside and gently threw it back. It's not right to throw things around. It's not good to hit too many people. Even if it doesn't hit anyone, it's not good to hit flowers and plants. This time the pillow flew out even faster and with even more force. Li stood in the yard and stretched comfortably. The scene he saw yesterday still made his blood boil when he thought about it. No wonder Bai Ji had a poem called, Holding the Pipa and Covering Half of Your Face. Only when it was half covered could it be called temptation. It could leave a lot of room for imagination, and the more one thought about it, the more shameful it would be. Li originally wanted to go to the city to see the new house this morning. Fang had selected a few according to his requirements, but the final choice was still up to Li. When he got up, he felt as if he had forgotten something. After washing up, changing clothes and walking out of the house, he finally understood when he saw the carriages coming from afar. He was afraid that today would not be peaceful. County Marquis Li has returned to the capital. Congratulations. An old man who looked like a butler came down from the carriage in front and said with a smile, I'm here to congratulate you on behalf of my lord. Your lord is? The Minister of Revenue. Oh, it's Lord Qin. Li nodded. Before he could say a few more words, another person came up. Deputy Minister Ma. Li cupped his hands. Li knew this person. During the investigation of the accounts, the Divination Academy and the Imperial Censorate had forged a deep friendship. Deputy Minister Ma was the second in the Imperial Censorate, and this time he came in person. Deputy Minister Ma smiled and said, I'm very happy to hear that County Marquis Li has returned to the capital. I've prepared a small gift to show my respect. Please come in. The servants of the Li family had already come out and moved the things from the horse into the house. Li glanced at it casually. It was a small gift, but it didn't seem to be a small gift at all. The butler of the Qin's mansion and Deputy Minister Ma did not say much before they left. Before Li had time to drink water, another person came to visit. This time it was the Shen family. Li did not have any friendship with Prime Minister Shen and the Shen family. Last time when the Lioli Glaze exhibition was held in the palace, the Shen family stood up and spoke for him. Although he did not know why they came to join in the fun, he could not neglect them. However, this was only the beginning. Li admitted that he had many enemies in the capital, but he also had many friends. This matter involved many factions in the imperial court and the struggle for interests. It was not something that could be explained clearly in a few words. He had some friendship with the Minister of Revenue and the Imperial Censorate. It was not surprising that the Wang family came. Of course, there was no need to mention the family of generals. Even the Shin family, thinking about it, it made sense. He had actually mentally prepared for these things the day before. However, when some officials and nobles he had never even seen before also came to offer gifts, he was truly surprised. Among these people, some were the parents of students in the academy and had a reason to visit. However, there were also some who had no relationship at all. The old woman of the Li family stood by his side. Seeing his confused expression, she patted his hand and said with a smile, To be able to become a duke at your age is the first in decades. This is not strange at all. Ever since the founding of the country, unless there had been great achievements in expanding territory and benefiting thousands of years, the nobility had not been increased. Only some old officials who had toiled for the country their entire lives or fierce generals who had fought their entire lives would receive a small nobility before they died to protect their descendants. To be able to go from a commoner to repeatedly receiving the emperor's favor and become a duke in a short 2 or 3 years was an inconceivable matter. He was still very young and still had limitless potential. Given the emperor's high regard for him, who knew how far he could go in the future, it was better to make friends than to make enemies. In just one morning, the house's empty storage room was filled to the brim with gifts. Even so, there was still an unending stream of carriages coming in from outside, so much so that the servants of the Li family were somewhat overwhelmed. At this moment, Li suddenly felt that there was no meaning in working so hard to expand his business. If he needed money, he would disappear for a few months. If he disappeared a few times a year, wouldn't he be able to become rich by accepting gifts? Chapter 748. The servants of the Li family moved carts after carts of gifts into the house. Li stood in the yard thinking of new ways to earn money. He couldn't keep disappearing. It would be fine if he disappeared once or twice, but people weren't fools. If he disappeared too many times, they might suspect that he was cheating. In this way, the reputation he had worked so hard to build would be ruined. He thought about it carefully. When he married Rui, he was in a daze and didn't even remember what happened. This was the first time he got married in his life. It was too hasty. He had to find a chance to hold a formal wedding in the future. He had to make it grand and earth-shattering. He had to invite the royal family, the Wang family, and any rich family in the capital. As for Li Xian, it would depend on how many gifts he gave. In this way, there would be many opportunities to receive gifts in the future. On second thought, it seemed that his birthday was coming. In the past 2 years, he had spent it with Rui and the others at home. Should he make a small celebration this year? Well, it was worth thinking about. Young master, that room is full. Old Fang walked over and said with a surprised expression. It wasn't a festival today, but the number of people who came to send gifts almost reached the outside of the village. Clean up another room. Li waved his hand. When he was about to go out to have a look, he saw someone who surprised him. County Marquis Li. When he saw Li Yi again, Assistant Minister Wei's attitude was very humble. No matter how many gifts others gave, this Assistant Minister Wei of the Ministry of Rights was on the side of the King of Shu and had a close relationship with the Chen family. How could he come at this time? Was he attracted by my charisma and wanted to forsake darkness for light? Assistant Minister Wei glared at Wei Junliang and said angrily, "Unfilial son, apologize to County Marquis Li." One side of Wei Junliang's face was still swollen. He said in a trembling voice, "County Marquis Li, it's all my fault for offending you. Please forgive me." Although the two of them were about the same age, Wei Junliang didn't dare to treat the other person as someone who was on the same level as him. Wei Ji forced a smile and said, "Marquis, the compensation for the girl's clothes has already been delivered last night." After leaving the Chen family yesterday, the last glimmer of hope in his heart was extinguished. Although he had just been transferred to the capital not long ago, he had long heard of County Marquis Li's murderous methods. If they were targeted by him, even if he had the Chen family behind him, they could forget about having a good ending. Li smiled and said, "Sir Wei is truly trustworthy." Wei Ji nodded repeatedly. Of course. Seeing the two of them still standing there, Li probed, "Does Sir Wei want to go in and have a cup of tea?" Of course, the meaning of this sentence was not to invite them in for tea. To be precise, it should be, "Why are you still here? Do you want me to invite you in for a cup of tea?" Wei Ji was a shrewd old man, and his ability to read people's thoughts and body language was also first-rate. Naturally, he could understand what he was trying to say. "County Marquis Li is busy, we'll go back first." "Sir, you're back." A young man walked in from outside and looked at Li Yi with a happy expression. Then, he looked back and asked in confusion, "Sir, is that the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights, Wei Ji?" Li Yi patted Louis Zhang's shoulder and said with a smile, "You're already the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights, don't call me sir." Louis Zhang smiled and did not agree or refute. Some habits could not be changed in a short period of time. Moreover, he did not intend to change them. "Isn't Wei Ji from the Chen family?" A trace of doubt appeared on Louis Zhang's face and he asked, "Why is he here?" Wei Ji patted his buttocks and left. Only now did Li Yi realize that this guy had only brought his son today. Visiting without giving a gift, how rude. "I don't know." Hearing Louis Zhang's words, he shook his head and said, "I heard that Assistant Minister Wei spent 10,000 taels of silver to buy a piece of clothing. How extravagant. He's just a small assistant minister. His entire life salary can't even add up to that much. I don't know where that money came from. When you go down, you have to be more careful. Corruption is not allowed." Louis Zhang's status in the Secret Intelligence Bureau was not low. The Secret Intelligence Bureau was a sharp sword hanging above the heads of the officials. It was used to supervise and warn them. Fighting corruption was also one of their duties. Louis Zhang was startled for a moment before nodding and saying, "This subordinate will remember." Originally, he had planned to go out early today to look at the residence and then inspect the shops and fences. Looking at the situation outside, this plan would probably have to be put on hold for the time being. He would have to wait until the afternoon to see what the situation was like. "I heard that you slapped Xianxia again in the restaurant yesterday. That was really satisfying. It's a pity that I wasn't there." Li Xian strode in with a regretful expression on his face. His personality was that of a bystander. He could even kick the King of Shu twice. He had even beaten up Xianxia once before. What kind of sin did young Duke Qin commit? As the saying goes, those who do too much evil will bring about their own destruction. He always liked to steal other people's wives. Every time he went out, he would either be slapped or seriously injured. This was retribution. After establishing the Academy of Sciences, Li Xian became a true scientific maniac. He couldn't usually see the heir's wife since she was in the palace. He could only vent all his energy on research. Li Xian didn't come alone. His brother-in-law Wang Yong followed behind him. He stepped forward and said to Li Yi apologetically, "I'm really sorry. I have already punished Wang Yu for what happened yesterday. I hope Brother Li doesn't take it to heart." "How could I? If a child is disobedient, I can just hang him up and give him a beating." Li Yi wasn't someone who liked to hold grudges. He waved his hand to show that he didn't care. "Let's talk inside." Wang Yong probably came to discuss matters related to cooperation with him. As a friendly business partner, his attitude towards him was naturally better. After the tea was served, Wang Yong only took a sip and went straight to the point. He described in detail to Li Yi about the matters related to the colored glass business in the past few months. A few months ago, when Li Yi left the capital, it happened to be the day when the Wang family's colored glass bazaar ended. The number of colored glass sold at the bazaar was carefully planned to not only meet the needs of the rich in the capital, but also not appear to be common and cause the price to fall. The royal family, the Wang family, and the Li family made a lot of money in those days. After that, in order to ensure continuous profits, except for the occasional small amount of colored glass sold by the Wang family around the capital, there were no more large-scale sales of colored glass. Waves of foreign merchants walked out of the capital, leaving their footprints all over the Jing kingdom. They walked out of the Jing kingdom and went to the world so that the light of the rising sun could shine further. I don't know what channel the Cui family has used, but they have also accumulated a lot of colored glass in their hands. Wang Yong frowned slightly and said, "Although they haven't been released for the time being, I heard that the Cui family will hold a colored glass appreciation conference in the capital in a few days. This is not good news for us." Li Yi certainly knew how the Cui family got their colored glass, and he had been paying attention to the news from the Cui family. However, he did not know that the Cui family was also going to hold a colored glass appreciation conference. It seemed that even if there was an intelligence system, sometimes it was not as well informed as these century-old clans. The Cui family actually had a lot of businesses under their name, and they were involved in a wide range of fields. The Li family almost had an absolute monopoly on the business of perfume and spirits, but there were not too many secrets in the area of ready-made clothing or weaving. There were countless imitators, and the Cui family was the largest imitator. Even if the quality and reputation of the imitators were not comparable, it would still more or less affect the business of the Cui family. Chapter 749. It was not easy to find a large group of foreign businessmen with blonde hair and blue eyes, but it was possible to find a large group of foreign businessmen who were not fluent in the official language. The Cui family had almost monopolized the jewelry industry in the Jing state. Although the Wang family was a large family with many industries, it was only in the past few months with a large number of lioli that they had a foot in it. In this regard, their influence was still inferior to the Cui family. Colored stones had always been a rare commodity and were known as auspicious. They could only be found but not sought. Although a large number of them appeared some time ago, there were so many rich people in the capital that the number could not meet everyone's needs. After a few months, the Cui family's colored stone appreciation party naturally attracted people's attention again. Especially those who failed to get it for various reasons the last two times, they began to be impatient early. Emperor Jing only wore an outer robe. After a meal, he took a walk in the garden as usual. He wondered, where did the Cui family get so many colored stones? How would I know? Li Yi shook his head and said, however, the emergence of a large number of colored stones is not a good thing. If it is not controlled well, it makes a big mess. Emperor Jing looked at him and asked, what do you mean? Colored stones are precious because they are rare. If colored stones are like the gravel on the ground and can be found everywhere, then there is no value to speak of. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, Your Majesty, think about it. If someone with ulterior motives sells the gravel at a sky-high price and the world rushes to buy it, then all the silver in the world will fall into the hands of that person. In this way the world will be in chaos. You mean that the Cui family has accumulated a large number of colored stones. Once they are released, the capital will be in chaos? It is only a possibility. Li Yi shook his head and said, recently I just want to stay at home peacefully and take care of my own affairs. I can't manage the Cui family. Peacefully? Emperor Jing glanced at him. These days, the memorials of impeachment in the court have piled up higher than the table. Is this what you mean by peacefully? This is really unfair. I heard that you let people block more than a dozen of the capital's playboys in the restaurant and let their elders personally take them away. There are countless people who can testify that I was bullied. You even made Wei Ji pay 10,000 taels for a piece of clothing? Your Majesty, aren't you curious as to how an assistant minister like him got so much silver? Emperor Jing glanced at him and said, I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint you this time. Since Wei Ji could be pushed out, it's impossible for him to have made any major mistakes. Even if he made some small mistakes, he will only be fined a few months' salary at most. Your Majesty, what are you saying? How could this subject be disappointed? This subject can't be more than happy for your Majesty to have an uncorrupted official like Assistant Minister Wei. Li Yi said with a disappointed expression. Alright, stop pretending in front of me. Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, You have nothing to do at home these days. You might as well go to the palace to accompany Shanning and Yongning. They are close to you. As a princess, you can't run out of the palace every day. A place like the palace was too depressing and was not suitable for children to live in. However, the two little girls had different identities and could not go out of the palace every day. In fact, when they were at home, it was quite lively and noisy. It was like a family. Rui also liked the two little girls. Recently, she liked children more and more. When Li Yi walked out of the imperial garden, two small figures, each carrying a small school bag, were already waiting for him outside. They did not need to stay in the palace all day. Every day, they would be sent to the Princess Royal's Women's College at a fixed time. Of course, due to their identities, they had specialized female teachers there and did not have many opportunities to interact with other people. Goodbye, Imperial Father. The proud Lolita waved at Emperor Jing from afar. Li Yi held one of them in each hand and walked out of the palace. Emperor Jing looked in that direction for a long time until the figures of one big and two small figures completely disappeared. Only then did he withdraw his gaze. His face showed some envy. Changde hesitated for a moment and went forward to say, County Marquis Li said that if you move out of the palace, it will be very beneficial to your body. Recently the weather has been hot. Your Majesty, why not move to Tsujiang Courtyard? Emperor Jing looked around and saw the tall palace walls. His expression was a little sad. He murmured, I also want to. Li Yi had already decided on the new residence 2 days ago. It was not far from the mathematics college. The place was very big and the environment was quiet. It was the most suitable for a vacation and nurturing the fetus. The original owner was a wealthy merchant in the capital. He originally refused to sell it, but after hearing who was buying the residence, he completed all the procedures on the same day. The new residence could not be moved in immediately. Before that, Li Yi had to spend a few days to redecorate the inside so that it would be comfortable to live in. He had already thought about it. When the time came, he would not bring so many people to the new residence. He would only bring a few servant girls to be responsible for the daily cleaning work. As for taking care of Rui, he could do it himself. Speaking of which, he had been taken care of by others for 2 lifetimes. Now he had truly learned to take care of others. Of course, he had to thank Mississippi Lu. In the Qi Kingdom, when she was injured and he raised her like a pig, he cooked and brewed medicine every day. From time to time, he would take her out to relax, chat with her and sleep with her. He had never taken care of anyone like this before. It had also changed some of Li Yi's carelessness. Alright. Husband, I really can't drink anymore, Rui said helplessly as she put down the spoon. Drink another mouthful. Li Yi picked up the spoon and blew on it before carefully reaching it over. He had brewed this soup for a long time. It was very nourishing and was most suitable for a pregnant woman to drink. Of course, one could drink it even if they were not pregnant. This soup had a comprehensive effect and tasted good. Xuanhuan had already drunk 2 small bowls. After drinking the last mouthful, Rui refused to drink any more no matter what. Li Yi saw that there was still quite a lot left in the soup bowl. It would be a waste to pour it away. After all, he had spent a lot of effort on this soup. He then turned to look at Xuanhuan. The little servant girl touched her slightly bulging belly and said pitifully, Young master, I can't drink any more. Li Yi shook his head. When he was about to pour the soup bowl out, he paused. Mississippi Lu was not practicing her swordsmanship in the courtyard. She put autumn water aside and sat by the stone table. She stared blankly in a certain direction. This scene made Li Yi's expression become a little dazed. It was as if he had returned to the small courtyard beside Fanglin Park. In the past, she rarely stared blankly like this. However, he did not know when it started, but Li Yi often saw this scene in front of him. The girl had grown up and had something on her mind. Mississippi Lu was not like Xuanhuan. Everything was written on her face. Although the two of them were very familiar with each other, it was undeniable that Li Yi had never seen through her thoughts. Drink some soup? Li Yi walked over with a small bowl and placed it on the stone table. Mississippi Lu glanced at him and did not say anything. It's delicious and nourishing. Li Yi looked at her and said, your body has not completely recovered. You should drink more. I'm not drinking. Just drink a mouthful. I'll give you the white rabbit creamy decoction later. Li Yi habitually pinched her chin. After blowing on it, he passed the spoon over. Mississippi Lu opened her mouth and also habitually swallowed. Then Li Yi's hand froze. She seemed to have realized something. She lowered her head and looked down, but there was no expression on her face. This scene had actually happened often in the past. She would never go along with Li Yi's character. Whenever something happened, she would first resist a little and then reluctantly give in. For a long time she had been drinking medicine like this. She drank a mouthful of medicine and was rewarded with a white rabbit creamy decoction. The two of them were used to this kind of transaction. However, just now, they seemed to have forgotten that this was no longer the Qi Kingdom. It was no longer the small courtyard beside Fragrant Forest Park where only the two of them resided. Sorry? It was a habit. Li Yi was the first to react. He quickly retracted his hand and did not let her drink the soup. He was ready to run away at any time. Mississippi Lu did not have any special reaction. She only glanced at him and said calmly, put it down. Put the soup down. Mississippi Lu repeated. After making sure that she was not angry at all, Li Yi put down the bowl and looked at her in surprise. This wasn't her style at all. Mississippi Lu glanced at him. Why are you still here? Li Yi looked at her and said, you're a little strange today. Holding autumn water in her hand, Mississippi Lu narrowed her beautiful eyes and asked, how strange? Strange? Seeing that the familiar Mississippi Lu had returned, Li Yi took a step back and said with a smile, you're quite pretty. Remember to wash the dishes. After a while, Mississippi Lu had finished reading the letter. She put it on the table and stood up. She didn't argue with Li Yi about what had just happened. She turned around and went back to her room. Li Yi picked up the letter in surprise and looked at it. After a while he slowly put it down. He glanced at the closed door of Mississippi Lu's room and frowned slightly. Yang Liuqing had left. Just as suddenly as she came, she left just as suddenly. She didn't say where she went, nor did she say whether she would come back. She just thanked Mississippi Lu in the letter for teaching her martial arts in the past 2 years. These 2 years were the happiest 2 years of her life. She would never forget all of this. She would always have such a master. She couldn't repay the kindness of giving her a new life. There was nothing else in the letter after that. Li Yi's index finger gently tapped on the table. A look of reminiscence appeared on his face. Excuse me, does Rui Lu live here? The young girl who was about the same age as Mississippi Lu appeared before him more than a year ago. She carried a small bag on her back and held a long sword in her hand. The cold expression on her face was exactly the same as Mississippi Lu's. At that time she wanted to challenge Rui, who was ranked first on the hero ranking board. She talked about the rules of jianghu every time she opened her mouth. After losing to Rui, she wholeheartedly wanted to be her master. Although Mississippi Lu didn't agree, Li Yi was still a little surprised at her perseverance. Every day before dawn she would come over to boil water, chop firewood and clean the courtyard. She almost took care of all the chores in the house. Before her, Mississippi Lu was the most hard-working person that Li Yi had ever seen. After her, Li Yi had never seen anyone who worked harder than her. She seemed to be carrying a heavy burden that had been buried in the bottom of her heart. She had never revealed it to anyone. In the past 2 years, the only thing that she had done was to continuously surpass herself. From a petty thief who knew some kung fu, she had now become a top-notch master. Although she was still a long way from becoming a master or a master like Mississippi Lu, the speed of her improvement was too fast. She had a bright future ahead of her. Even now, she was ranked at the top of the heaven ranking board. Li Yi didn't know what she was carrying that made her so strict with herself. She was curious about the reason why Yang Liuqing left, but she was more concerned about Mississippi Lu's feelings. Her cold and unapproachable face was just a facade. She was cold on the outside but warm on the inside. She never talked much. She would prove everything with her actions. If she hadn't recognized her as a disciple from the bottom of her heart, she wouldn't have spent so much effort to cultivate her. Although she didn't show it on the surface, when she left just now, Li Yi saw some different expressions on her face. Shuzhou. Li had always known that Yang Liuqing had a secret. Especially on the way back from the Qi Kingdom, this feeling became stronger. Thinking of something, Li walked out and entered another small yard. Second granduncle was asleep on the rocking chair. The sloppy old man squatted far away, flipping through a yellowed book. When Li walked over, he didn't even notice it until Li coughed softly. He hurriedly stuffed the book into his sleeve, raised his head and asked, "What's wrong? Are you going out?" As a martial arts grandmaster, it was inconceivable that he would need a reminder to realize that someone was approaching him. Li looked at him and asked, "What book are you reading, Su? You're so engrossed in it." Hearing this, the sloppy old man straightened up and said with a smile, "A profound martial arts secret book. You won't understand it even if I tell you." It turns out that the men and women in the profound martial arts secret books don't wear clothes. Li didn't expect him to be so reserved at such an old age. With his status and strength as a guru, he still needed to rely on this kind of book to solve his personal problems. He said with a smile, "Su, if you like it, I'll give you some more profound secret books next time. The color pages are very precious." Having seen more real and exciting things, although he was not very interested in those traditional picture books, it was still very easy for him to get a few. The sloppy old man said seriously, "You misunderstood. This is really a secret book, I know." Li waved his hand and said, "Don't worry, Su. I won't tell anyone." If the news that a Wulin guru liked to read erotic books was released, the sales of Wulin tabloids would definitely increase greatly. After smiling, Li's face became serious and he asked, "Does Su know something about Yang Liuqing?" The sloppy old man was about to explain. Hearing this, he looked at him and asked, "What happened to her?" "She left, so I want to know something about her." Li told him about Yang Liuqing's departure. If this matter had no beginning and no end, he was afraid that Mississippi Lu would always feel uncomfortable. The sloppy old man thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "The martial arts she used seemed to be from an old guy in the Wu Kingdom." "The Wu Kingdom?" Li frowned slightly. The sloppy old man looked a little nostalgic and nodded. "If I'm right, she should have some relationship with the royal family of the Wu Kingdom." You're tuning in to the Sword Dance in the Vast Sky YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.